big news in the Elite League world this week. There's been a complete restructure of how the season will look for every team, with a two-conference setup now, and also a change in the import level. Let's talk about the conferences first. Paul, what are the reasons at board level for the restructure?
Well, the reasons for the restructure are quite simple, and that is to ensure and protect against the league becoming uncompetitive. Now, the reason just to explain that the sort of thought process behind that is quite straightforward. One of our issues is that the three arena teams, they have a different model to what the rest of the teams have in the league, simply because of the cost of running an arena team, and they have to continually invest and improve their side, which they will continue to do to compete, and therefore putting restraints and restrictions on those teams starts to restrict their ability to actually trade. And as a result, we put them in jeopardy. So we can't afford to do that. We need the arena teams to continue and to be able to prosper. The issue, therefore, for us is the only way we're going to keep that competitiveness is we have to get the smaller teams stronger. And the way of actually doing that is to, quite frankly, get more funding into the smaller teams. I mean, that is the only way you're ever really going to do that. Everybody talks about the wage cap, but actually the wage base is probably more important than the wage cap, because that ensures we have a certain level of quality going forward. But the reality is funding, and we need to get into a situation where financially we continue to improve. The league has moved mountains over the last 2 years. I've seen that since I've got involved. There's been huge change. We're a debt-free league for the first time since I've been there, and from what I understand, for probably many years before. We've done a lot to improve it. We're actually having discussions around constitution. We have proper voting. We run things in the right way. So when decisions are made, I accept people may come at me about those decisions, but these are decisions that are only passed if there's a majority vote in the room. And that majority, by the way, is more than 6. So it can't just be one, it's a number of votes on top of that. Excuse me. So we are very, by doing what we're doing, by simply paying one less game against the smaller teams, which just happen to be the Northern Division Tides, and playing one extra game against the Southern guys, then that effectively means a number of things. One, we will reduce our cost in transportation, which we desperately need to do because it's very expensive, probably the worst for us in the whole league. We will also be able to generate more revenue through ticket sales, and no one can dispute that. When we see a Belfast or a Sheffield or a Nottingham, we look at circa 2,000 fans coming in. When we look at a Dundee or an Edinburgh or a Hull, then we look at sort of circa 1,300-1,400 fans coming in. And that has a fiscal impact, but this isn't just about Cardiff, this is about the Scottish teams, who we're trying to build their fan bases. They need more competitive games, they need to be able to compete with one another. Looking at the smaller teams, those guys don't want to be coming down to Cardiff and getting thumped, or going across to Belfast and getting thumped, and then trying to get back home after 4 or 5 games on the road getting thumped, and then try and build a crowd base. They need to be playing in a more competitive environment, and what this does, it doesn't take away the variety at all. It means that we just have that extra game against the Big Four, and we lose one of those games. We're still going to play Hull at home twice. We're still going to play, all those sides. But it's important that the smaller clubs get the opportunity to play more games against the smaller clubs, and that's what we've seen. And you're going to see progress this year. For example, I know that there's 1 or 2 teams that there last year that didn't play with a full quota of imports, who are going to push to play with a full quota of imports this year. What this does is this helps them achieve that goal. We don't want them turning up with 6 imports. We want them turning up with 10. They won't be our quality because they don't have the spend that we have. That's
or 11.
Why they're at the bottom.
Or 11.
11, as it is.
I guess the 2 main challenges, to play devil's advocate here, from the people who have had a fairly strong reaction to this change, are twofold. One, from a league perspective, will this not create a bigger divide between the haves, which many are calling obviously the Southern Conference, and the have-nots, which would look to be primarily those in the Northern Conference? What would you say to that question?
I would say not at all. I would say actually what's happening here, what's going to happen here, is you're going to create competition in the other conference. So when you've got effectively, let's say 4 teams all competing for one spot, because the gap is closed, because they're playing those extra games at that level, What that's going to do with those teams is two things. One, put more money back in the bank because of travel. Two, increase their crowds because they feel they've got a chance of winning some games. And what that's going to do is put pressure on the management and the business of those clubs to become more competitive. What that's going to do is generate momentum to push the bottom tier of the teams up higher. Will the other teams go on? They have a budget. They're well aware that there's no point in us doing all of this work if they're going to go off and spend an extra £5 grand a week on players. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because the money isn't there for them to actually do that. But they still have to perform. They still have to have those, the level of quality on the ice to satisfy their crowd base. If suddenly Manchester United dropped down to only signing, 8 foreign import players, then Manchester United wouldn't be top of the Premiership and they wouldn't be getting 65,000 fans every week. That would drop, as we've seen with Liverpool recently, and their fan base dropped because their performances have dropped. And then all of a sudden, that model has a major issue. And we don't have multi-million-pound deals coming in through TV rights and sugar daddies all over the place trying to throw millions of pounds into it. It doesn't work like that. We're doing this to protect our business and to make sure that we go forward as a league. And those decisions that were made the other day, from a fiscal point of view, were the best decisions that have been made in the 2 years I've been there, without a shadow of doubt.
It's interesting, even the players, Paul, that are starting to now get concerned in potentially the Southern Conference, that their stats won't stack up as well potentially against some of the players in the Northern Conference, and actually looking at how they might be able to prolong their careers or position themselves for the following season, because they're wondering whether or not people will understand that the majority or a greater percentage of their games this season as opposed to last year will actually be against the top teams, and therefore that will probably have an effect on their stats. So there'll be players. Obviously, Galbraith, led the league in scoring last year in Braehead, and he might have more of an opportunity in which to do that if he returns to Braehead again this year. But it's just one of those things that I think it does create a more even playing field where both conferences are going to have very much their work cut out for them in order to achieve, and it may in fact be a benefit potentially to the Northern Conference, but that's only going to help, I think, create greater interest and more competition.
We look at Belfast lost 5 games to win the league. They're going to play us one more time. They're going to play Nottingham one more time. They're going to play Sheffield one more time. Play Coventry one more time. They've got a tough ask to get anywhere near that next year. And the teams that were sort of circa 30 points below, those bottom 2 or 3 that were 30 points, they've got an extra game of playing teams around them. So they're going to come up in points, is what you see. So what I think is going to happen is that if we take the top and the bottom, I think you're going to see a closure in terms of the actual quality. And just so people fully understand it, because I think there's a bit of a mixed view out there, I think, or not quite clear in terms of the structure. 2 conferences, 5 on 5. They play each other 4 times home and away. They play the other conference 2 times home and away. That's how it works. And then what will happen then is you will have those 2 league tables displayed, those 2 conference tables displayed on the Elite League website, on our websites, but then also you'll have the consolidated result. So we're still going to be battling for 4th and 5th spot. We're still going to be battling for that position. That's not going to change. We've still got to play Braehead. And actually, what I think what is going to become very important for us is those smaller games, and I say smaller with respect to the smaller sides, they become more important for us. We have to win those games. They're very important for us. So all of a sudden, if you've only got the chance of playing Edinburgh twice away, we've got to win those games. So I think actually what it does is it puts more emphasis and focus on the games that we're going to play them 3 times away or what have you. Now we're going to play them twice. So that's potentially, that is just putting pressure on us in terms of how we perform. So in terms of the whole league structure, all this has done is close the top and the bottom up, made it more competitive, enabled the conference teams to get the crowds that they want to see. Remember, the Edinburgh crowds don't want to see the Nottingham coming. Edinburgh want to see Dundee coming. We don't want to see Edinburgh coming. We want to see Nottingham coming. So why shouldn't we give what the fans want? And it's what the fans want, because look at the numbers. The fans didn't want it, the crowds will be the same. So all this issue about diversity, okay, yes, there is a slight change in diversity, but only moving slightly towards what fans want. And we know it's what fans want because look at the numbers on the gates.
With their feet.
In terms of having that extra game then against the bigger teams, obviously we know that the Devils have done a great job of punching above our weight for quite a few seasons now, down to recruitment and the atmosphere created in the tent by the fans and several different factors really. Does this not make it harder for us finish for fourth or finish for fifth if we have to compete against the bigger budget teams more?
I don't see how, because we're in a situation, I mean, don't forget the gap between the bottom 3/4 or the bottom 3. So 1 to 6, if you like, the bottom 4, there was quite a gap between that. So that means in order for that gap to close, we will compete with Coventry and Braehead this year. Okay, but effectively, if Braehead win their league, they'll be second or first, depending on how they perform, because the 2 winners of the conference will go into first and second spot, identical to the NHL setup. So that's how that will work, and then everybody else will filter in. So yes, we're playing for 4th, 5th, 6th place, but we still end up playing getting into a playoff position of having to play a 4th, 5th, 6th, or whatever it is that, you know, wherever we actually sit. So yes, you're right. It makes us maybe slightly more difficult, but don't forget, it makes it slightly more difficult for all the other teams too.
Yeah.
It's not just us; it's all of the teams.
I think we've got to be careful though in accepting that, you know, because of our budget in pro rata to other teams, that we accept that a 4th place would be a victory. It would, is what we'd say behind the scenes, but we have seen ourselves beat the top guys.
Yeah.
And I think probably if we didn't have maybe the retirement of Author, the Max Beermeyer injury, and the Mark Smith injury, we might have been able to push and close that gap ourselves. So there's always variables that have an impact on your success during the season, but there's no reason to say that the Cardiff Devils still don't have aspirations to win the league title. It's just we recognize that probably in relation to money and spend per week, that's a very significant challenge. But the other challenges, I think, as far as coaching and management and selection and recruitment, we do as well as anybody in the league, if not better, and that gives us that margin. It's always tough, as you know, Paul, but I think it's achievable, and we're showing it year on, year out.
You mentioned about the NHL setup, Paul, just briefly, with the conferences. Do we know, I think this is something probably Coventry and Cardiff fans will be quite keen to find out, whether it will be the top 4 teams from each conference that qualify for the playoffs, or will it be the top 8 teams overall?
Top 8 teams overall. It will be exactly the same, so nothing will change in terms of the way.
So it'll be the highest 8 totals of points.
Yeah.
Correctly. So effectively, if we're sat in 3rd place with 75 points, and over here 3rd place is 85 points, then when you put the 2 leagues together, then we would sit above the one in 3rd place that might be in 9th place because of league totals. So we're still playing on a consolidated league basis. And now you understand that those games we're playing only 2 times home and away, are more important for us. We have to win those games. You know, they really become important, and they do for the other clubs too. So, you know, and it means those other clubs now have got to face Cardiff one more time, rather than facing the teams that they'd expect to go off and win convincingly. Yeah. So they got a much tougher, tougher ask too. So it's you know, in terms of where we sit, all in all, you know, I just think it makes the league a lot more competitive, a lot more enjoyable. The fans will definitely vote with their feet, because we know that, because they'd rather see certain games and pick. There's a lot of fans that only come to certain games, but they got a chance of coming to one of those games extra this year, where they didn't last year.
You mentioned Belfast earlier. A question that's being asked a lot is, why are they in the Southern Conference?
Well, because quite frankly, their model wouldn't exist in the other conference. I mean, let's be fair. If we expected them to play more games against the lower teams, I mean, they're top of the league. It's just, you know, geographically, it's quite a coincidence that you know, the teams, with the exception of Braehead, those other teams at the bottom are all in the Northern Conference, and Belfast have to protect their model. So, you know, they have the same issue. Don't forget, they have their 12, 15 grand a week, whatever they have to pay for their gate. They have to fill that stadium. They have to get their 4,000 or 5,000 fans in there. And if you're asking them to play an extra game against Edinburgh and Dundee and Fife, well, that's a huge hit to them, plus the travelling costs that they have. They're looking to build their model too. So, you know, they still have to play those games, but there's less pressure on them now in terms of their crowd base. But, do you know, one thing that people forget about, particularly the fans, and not all fans, by the way, but a number of fans, they forget about the fact that we're very passionate about ice hockey, and we're very passionate about the sport and our clubs. But what we've got to remember is these things don't just happen. These things happen because of this thing called money. And money, at the end of the day, is what enables us to be able to put the show on for the fans, go through a season, and effectively, hopefully, engage greater in terms of community. All of these things only happen if we have something that's fiscally sound. What we've done here is we've put money back into the pockets of the clubs, and that's so that they can invest in their teams, in becoming more competitive, and that's what they'll do. And this whole, I mean, there is this rumour out there that means, oh, it's just all money back in our pockets. You know, these clubs don't make any money like all professional sports clubs. You know, we know that. They don't. Okay, maybe Nottingham because it's in a very different position to everybody else, but the rest of us don't. You know, we make a penny, we spend it on the team. We make 2 pennies, we spend it on the team. So we can spend that bit extra on the team. And for those fans who say, well, you know, well, that's my season ticket. Well, okay, we understand that. That's your point of view. But I think the real fans will be there because they're going to see more quality hockey this season. And it's going to put us in a position where I think we're going to, you know, we're going to have no different to any other season. We're going to have to compete to get there in, you know, that fourth, third spot. As Brent said, you know, we weren't that far away from third place. We weren't that far away from third place this year. We had the issues with the penalty shootouts. We had a horrific year on injuries. Well, let's just put a couple of those guys back in the pot and give us 4 or 5 points extra on, you know, on just winning 1 out of 2 in terms of penalty shootouts, and we were there, effectively there. So
the decision's been made to obviously try and make the league more competitive, but you know the phrase has cropped up during our chat of the lower teams. What, from the Elite League board's perspective, is the vanishing point for that term to go? By what season, by what point is the belief that it won't be the lower teams and other teams? How long is the board assuming that it will take to raise the parity?
Yeah, there will always be the higher teams and the lower teams. I mean, you know, look at football. Look at lots of sports. You know, primarily the top teams are the top teams. They always have been. They probably will be. They have the setup. They have the fan base. They have the stadia. They have all the things. You know, you're going to see it now with Cardiff Devils in 2 years' time. When we move into that new stadia, there is no way our fan base, as long as we do the right things, as long as we don't go bust, as long as we don't do crazy things in terms of our team or massively underperform, if we continue to manage the business in the right way towards ongoing development and invest in the community and get our growth coming, sow more seeds at lower level, what you're going to see is that business is going to go from strength to strength because numbers will grow because of our facility. And so, you know, there's always going to be this gap between top and bottom. What we have to do is learn the lessons of making sure, because this is the difference with ice hockey, it's such a fast sport that we don't want 9, 10, 11, 12 nil games. That will drive fans away. The teams getting beat won't want to come because they're just fed up, and the teams at the top, that's not entertaining ice hockey. What we all want is the 4-3 win in overtime, most of the time. They're as sweet for us as winning 10-0 against a Coventry or a Nottingham, which would be a one-off and very rarely happen, like that 7-1 win in Sheffield some years ago. Very sweet, but it will never happen probably for many, many years to come, if ever. So you're always going to have this situation, but it's just always going to be ongoing. The important thing is we have controls in place, more changes will come. There are things happening now outside of the league that potentially could mean more funding. We haven't even got around to talking about media and what's going to happen next year with those sorts of deals. These are things that we're in discussion with. At this point in time, they are positive, ongoing discussions, and the Elite League, when ready, will be more, you know, we'll be happy to release, I hope, that information over the next month or two.